I'm assuming that we'll know. Oh, hi. Welcome. Yeah. Welcome to this session, which has got us three Australian authors, all of whom write and publish with Moon Books. And we're going to be talking a bit about our work and also what it's like to practice magic in our various ways in this country, Australia. So we're going to begin with a little intro about our work and what we do. Frances, would you like to kick that off for a few minutes?
Thank you. Hello, welcome everybody. Good evening for anybody watching in the Southern Hemisphere, and good morning wherever you are in the rest of the world. My name is Frances Billinghurst, and I'm coming to you from Ghana country here in Adelaide, South Australia. I would sort of describe myself as a initiatory witch who has a strong leaning towards ceremonial and Kabbalah practices, with also a deep interest in metaphysics and sort of like an open channel or talking platform for various goddesses that come through, and in particular more the goddesses such as Ishgrigal, Kali, and also Hecate a little bit, but mainly Ishgrigal and Kali. So I'm coming from South Australia and Adelaide. I'll pass the baton on to Julie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie, and I'm from around Sydney. I'm living in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales in Australia. My book is, I've just got the one so far. It's Australian Druidry, and we look at how the practice of Druidry, based on how we understand the ancient Celtic Druids and get inspired in our practice by what we know of them. How do we put those practices into an Australian context? So I look at things like Australian seasons and trees and animals, and consider how we can do that in ways that are sensitive to this land and its history and cultures as well, and all the multifaceted parts of ourselves coming into it as well. Jane?
Thanks, Julie. I'm calling in from Bundjalung and Arakwal land in northern New South Wales. And yeah, I call myself a priestess, a pagan priestess, a priestess of the goddess, a ritualist, and a writer. And I practice a peculiar blend of magic that is a mix of reclaiming tradition magic and kind of mythic and spontaneous magical ceremonies. I love co-creating ritual with others. And yeah, I'm pretty passionate about walking within the mythos, like bringing that to life with our own bodies and voices, whether that's through aspecting or through following a myth together, or celebrating the seasons of the year, or a full moon eclipse down on the beach, and creating magic together around that. I think that we're supposed to also talk about our books, so maybe I'll just roll into give a really brief intro.
Can I just say
mine,
as well,
and we'll just go around again. Yeah.
I just, before we start,
Yes.
I know you both did it and how important it is, but I didn't mention the country that I'm on. I want to acknowledge that I'm on Darug and Gundungurra country, and I pay my respects to the elders.
A very beautiful piece of land that I have a strong connection to myself. Thanks, Julie. So what about if we just speak briefly about either one book or a couple of our books, and then kick off into a discussion? Does that seem okay?
Yeah, sounds
great.
Fine.
So, and we've been told to hold these up, so we're gonna try and do that. So this is my most recent book for Moon Books, Aspecting the Goddess, and this is a book that I really wanted to write for many, many years. In fact, I waited a long time to write it because it felt so personal that I just, I don't know, I felt like I needed more gravitas as an author maybe, or I needed more books behind me before I could put out this level of really, really personal engagement with, not just with mythology, but with ritual and magic. And so this book has got in it stories of 12 different goddesses that I personally have a relationship with in a variety of different ways. They're not all kind of equally deep or equally emotional or equally researched, but it's got long form stories about my relationships with those goddesses. And it also weaves in there different ways to work with goddesses or gods or divine beings or other kind of entities that you might have a relationship with or want to create a relationship with. So it is a workbook as well. It's got lots of processes and rituals and exercises and kind of technological magic stuff, how to do these things step by step. I have a couple of other books published by Moon Books, which is my Aphrodite's Magic and Journey to the Dark Goddess, and I still love them. And again, I think all my books combine this thing of my personal journey woven in with the mythology and a kind of direct magic, how anyone reading it can follow this journey, can create this magical spell for themselves, can do this work. And that's what I love to do. Let's go around again. Frances?
Okay, we might follow on because my first book through Moon Books, similar theme to one of your books, and Jane, is Encountering the Dark Goddess, Journey into the Shadow Realms, which was actually released in March this year. I had been running workshops on the Dark Goddess since 2006, so it's taken me over 10 years to write the book. And I suppose similar to how you work, Jane, because of my background in witchcraft, I'm very sort of devotional, and I've got 13 goddesses in this book, and each one is I'm helping the reader to sort of build up a relationship with the goddess, to actually understand her on her various levels through her stories. Some of the goddesses may not on the surface appear to be dark, and I sort of explain why I use that terminology to explain goddesses such as Morgan Le Fay in particular, who's one of my favourite stories and mythos and goddesses all together. And also then we've got the controversial Lilith, who some people say she's a goddess, some people say that she's a demon, so it depends on what you're coming through. But my practice has always been, when it comes to deity, it's building up a personal relationship with them. I see them as aspects of the divine. I do work with them on some level as archetypes, but to me they come through very sort of channeled, very real. So we explore the myth, who these goddesses are, and then there's a meditation and other aspects or ways we could actually work with that sort of darker energy, which to me is very chthonic, very sort of like with Kali in particular. She'll strip you back to the bones and then build you back up again. And then also I've got some sort of rituals in relation to working with, say, the dark of the moon or the waning energies as well. And though it is largely about goddesses, I actually was at a market today and there was one gentleman who stopped by my stall. He'd picked up the book at the last market and he thoroughly enjoyed it. So I think it's great that men are starting to read books on goddesses as well, and sort of like crossing that sort of gender divide sort of thing. And just briefly, my second book with Moon Books, also come together, Contemporary Witchcraft, Foundational Practices for a Magical Life, will be coming out in August this year. This book is based on my initial instruction into witchcraft about 25, 30 years ago, where I was always taught of various foundational practices that you learn and apply, that then you can add your magical workings onto, regardless of what direction you want to head into. So it's almost like laying your foundations when you build your house, or I'm giving you a sort of the ingredients, and it's up to you as to how you mix the ingredients, what shape you pour in the concrete into, and what sort of house you build on top of it. And this book, I mean, I still use these practices today. So, and it's something that I'm finding is missing in a lot of the books coming through today, is that foundational aspects of visualization, meditation, connection first. Everybody's rushing instead of just sort of like taking their steps through. So those are my 2 moon books that I have.
And that's 2 books in 1 year, is that right?
Yes, which is
very impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you. I said it usually takes me 10 years to write. I have
okay.
a number of books, but when I sent off this manuscript, the second manuscript was virtually on the verge of being completed. So I thought, well, heck, I'll strike while the iron's hot. And very grateful that Moon Books have taken on, technically, I guess I'm an unknown author for the Northern Hemisphere. So it's very exciting for me.
Great. Thanks, Frances. And Julie, tell us about your book.
Yeah, so it's been a while since it came out, Australian Druidry. It came out in 2017. But it was a long time coming. It definitely took me a good 10 years to formulate what I was wanting to say there. And then and working with Moon Books helped me to really work out how I was going to say that. Because I feel like this is something that I could have said in so many different ways, because so many Australians, whether they're Druids or Wiccans or just are interested in nature and the sacredness of nature here, would be interested in. So I found it quite difficult to work out how to say that. And they said, just write it for the Druids, and then other people will be able to look at that and get something out of it anyway, because they'll just be able to see a different facet. And that was really great. So I really appreciated, doing that. And it's had a lot of positive feedback in those years. I think it's been really good to see people engage with the idea of like a lot of the book was not necessarily saying this is how we do it. It was saying, let's ask these questions. Let's explore this together and see what happens in our local places. And then how we can share those ideas with each other and our communities and learn what we're doing as we practice our magical traditions, whatever they are really. I tried to make it very open, even though it's focused on Druidry, which is what I'm most interested in, I suppose. But I'm also, we practice, like Jane, we lived in the same town for a while and had people of all different kinds of backgrounds come together. And we're still running those circles, and we're doing some at the moment with your beautiful Aspecting the Goddess book, which is really awesome. It's really nice in the gardens there.
Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, it's great. And I think all of our different ways of looking at magical practice here in Australia and in the Southern Hemisphere, because there's sometimes people that I talk to from Brazil and South Africa and New Zealand that are enjoying seeing what we're doing as well. The process of learning and sharing and, working out how do we do this sensitively and respectfully is interesting. So, yeah.
It's also giving people and that beyond what was originally handed down. Even if they're living in America, that's one thing I don't understand is like, if you're in New York and someone else is in Florida, people don't seem to even have thought of looking at the wheel and maybe changing it. But I suppose we're in the Southern Hemisphere. That's something very fourth and foremost on our mind, that things are just so different down here.
Yeah, and so many different landscapes as well. Sorry, Jane.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I remember reading books, probably 30 years ago now, but book after book after book would say the sun rises in the east and then it moves through the southern to the south and then it sets in the west. And I would be like, well, no, it doesn't. And, they would say, and the winter solstice is in December. And I'd say, well, no, it isn't. And so I think for me, that's part of where us and Australian authors and witches and druids and pagans generally in the Southern Hemisphere kind of get their questioning and creative aspect, I would say, is because a lot of what we've read of this is so is not actually so. And so, we've been taken back to questioning fundamentally and then taken that question further about, well, what does work for us here? What is real? What is actually happening? And then I think I haven't got these questions in front of me that you formulated, Julie. Beautiful questions. Maybe you've got them there, but
maybe we're ready for them.
But heading towards this kind of broader question of like, how do we practice these magics and the different flavors that we've worked with in a land that perhaps several generations of our ancestors have been living in, but good question. but our far distant ancestors, mainly, many of us were not living here for thousands and thousands of years. Not all of us, of course, have that history. We have different histories amongst us. But it is a question that's very resonant, particularly in the Australian pagan community, and I'm sure in other places. And now we have this gorgeous question: what is it like practicing nature spirituality in Australia? Who wants to begin with that?
Difficult. Or challenging at times. I mean, in my tradition, I suppose it's based in England, excuse me, and it has been, I think when I was first on the scene, so to speak, there was a lot of resistance, apart from the usual, I'll just change your Sabbath 6 months around. There was sort of a lack of awareness that our energy flows in a different direction. As you pointed out, Jane, our sun goes across the sky in a different way, which reflects how we cast our circles, how we place our elements in our quarters if we're doing a traditional circle. And even a number of years ago, it's coming up to 10 years now, when I wrote my first book, which was about the Sabbaths here in especially South Australia, even just swapping the Sabbaths around, the seasonal festivals around 6 months, doesn't always work. Our summer solstice here, it may be in December, but the mythos that is Northern Hemispheric base tends to be more around Beltane. And then when we come to the next Sabbath, say Lammas or Linasa, that to me is usually our start of our bushfire season. So it's not like the gathering in of the harvest. It's like you've done that back at the summer solstice. So the mythos doesn't always change. And to sort of expand my sort of connection with the land, I've sort of tried to look to, say, here, as I mentioned, I'm on Kaurna country. But unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot written at this stage about their myths and their connection with the land, because that group of people were almost annihilated when the white settlers came due to the smallpox coming down the river. But thankfully, further south around the Coorong, where the Murray River comes to the ocean, we have the Ngarrindjeri people, which have actually been intensely studied, and there's been a few books around them. So we are beginning to get a little bit more information in, but we get the extreme heat in the summer. We get, I wouldn't say extreme cold, but we get chills here. And even within South Australia, we've got so many little microclimates as well. So I suppose when you look at it, Australia's the same size as America. And so everybody's going to have little differences. And I think being in, say, Australia or the Southern Hemisphere, we need to take that sort of an adventure trip to make something unique for us wherever we are in the country, and not just stick to, it's summer solstice and we all do the same rite. It's just like, well, it might be summer solstice, but our mythos or how we interpret the mythos might be completely different.
Yeah. And of course, this question, nature, spirituality. Sorry, Julie, I'll go to you in one sec. I was just wanting to just say that obviously nature spirituality or spiritual land-based spirituality, or a kind of living mythic and spiritual tradition, has been practiced by humans on this land for many, many tens of thousands of years. And I regard myself as, a latecomer to that, and but very grateful for the opportunity to be present on this land that has been in such intimate relationship with humans for so long. Yeah. Sorry, Julie, I interrupted you before.
No, it's okay. I was happy for you to keep going, really, on that, if you want.
Well, I'd be interested, like, where, Druidry in Australia, which I really don't know that much about, how that connects with the traditions that have been here for so long, have been living and still are living here for so long in communion with this land.
I'm working on a new book at the moment, and I'm really excited about the research that's gone into it. It's led me to have so many fascinating conversations with Aboriginal community leaders about, who we are and how we connect with the land, and the similarities and the differences between Celtic British mythological practices and the ways that those stories and the songs and even the rituals that we do, even if we're rebuilding them and recreating them, they're about connecting to the land in a similar, like they saw that there was a similarity between what we're trying to do and what they do. And I thought that was really cool to have those conversations. Just like coming together as friends and just like we'd just have lunch together and have a chat over our similarities and the way that there's been language loss and cultural loss, mainly because of the church and colonization and various forms of invasion in Britain and here. That there has been cultural loss and there's a rebuilding happening, and these sort of similarities that we have is a beautiful, not beautiful. I mean, it's shocking and it's sad and it's incredibly painful, but it's also beautiful to come together in solidarity over wanting to do better for the earth and for our cultures and for the languages and for the people that have managed to survive and hold on to those and pass them down to us. Our cultures have had witch burnings that basically were just the eradication of a generation of people that were practicing an older tradition and a folk tradition. And witchcraft and Druidry shares that. The Druids were, pushed out by the Romans even much, much earlier. And, we're rebuilding those traditions, I suppose, and finding common ground with Indigenous people over that is it's really interesting. And I've only felt a real welcoming in working with friends in the Aboriginal community who are trying to rebuild connections and educate non-Indigenous people about Indigenous practices. And it's beautiful, the way that we learn about how much they love the earth and how we do as well, and finding ways that we can come together on that is really cool. Kind of straight into the second question now.
Oh well, I think questions are like that, aren't they?
Yeah.
I was going to talk about relationship, like listening to you speak, Julie, just then, about the relationship. I think that in a way I don't come with this kind of preset relationship to any piece of land I'm living on, whereas maybe if I was in France, for example, where some of my ancestors come, I might kind of assume that I already had this pre-set down relationship, that my grandmother's were carrying that thread. Whereas here I feel it's a newer relationship for me. And I guess there's that, like all sorts of things that happen at the beginning of a new relationship. Like there's this awe and wonder and curiosity, and sometimes, not knowing. And for me, establishing or creating or inviting some relationship between myself and the land that I'm living on or living with is a very dynamic part of nature spirituality, earth-based practices. And I think that core concept of relationship, like with each other, here we have, maybe a witch, a priestess and a druid, on a panel together talking about our relationships with this land and with our work and with each other. And I think that concept of relationship as a really dynamic, active part of magical tradition, not just with other humans, but with the land, is key for me. And I see you've helpfully put up this other question. How do you engage with Indigenous traditions and culture? I mean, if I was to answer that, I would say respectfully and largely by reading or attending or watching lectures or seeking out activities where I am like a student, where I'm learning. But I also think that it's not a direct engagement with Indigenous traditions, but my walking on the land, sitting on the land, being with the land, listening to the land is an engagement, not directly with the human tradition, perhaps, but with that land's traditions, if you like. It's traditions of, air and forest and whatever else, waters, which to me is like a parallel or a complementary way of being present with the Indigenous traditions and cultures that have been here so long and so powerfully.
I also see it as sort of, from what I can sort of learn from the Indigenous people here, and then taking that back and looking at how I can apply that, say, with my own bloodline, with my own ancestors, with my own culture, to fill in that gap that being basically a white Caucasian has a lot of my history has actually been lost. My connection with the land has been lost. So I'm in a process of reestablishing it. And we've got a better, no better place really than an ongoing culture here for, as you said, Jane, for a number of hundreds of thousands of years of people that we can look to and see how they manage the land and how they sort of involve that mythos and their connection with it, and then take from that. Quite lucky here in Adelaide is that the planetarium at the local university do a lot of shows, and one of them has been Aboriginal Skies, and that was really beneficial when I was writing my book on the Sabbaths, because though I'm on Kaurna country and we've got Ngarrindjeri down at the Coorong, there's other various little tribal groups or family groups in the area as well, and they all have different stories to our iconic constellation, the Southern Cross, which I found extremely interesting, whether it's a shark being chased by two sharks chasing a stingray, or it's the claw of the eagle, and there's all this mythos behind that somehow I'm hoping to work a little bit more into my own practice. If I go out there stargazing, or if we see in the rites when they say you've got to align with certain stars, or you'll see these constellations arising on the horizon, to me it's always the Southern Cross, because that's the only constellation that we can really see that's unique in the Southern Hemisphere.
We've got a question. Where do you find out about this? My Indigenous family members have passed. So I'm not sure whether you mean your Indigenous, like Aboriginal family members, Sherry. I guess finding out about your family tree, if you've got an Aboriginal heritage there, is sometimes not possible for some people. Unfortunately, the stolen generations have cut off so many people tragically from their country, and it's really devastating how often that happens, I think. But like the rest of us who don't have connection to country through a kinship relationship, there's still opportunities to learn about where we live and engage with culture like that. There's always things happening in our local communities. I don't know about everywhere. I mean, but most places have an Aboriginal association of some kind that puts on local events that you can go along to. Just this morning, I was at our Gundungurra swamp care project, and we're changing an old development into a bush rehabilitation, and just getting to know people and having chats and going along to events like that. I think is a really important beginning for all of us. And if you have Indigenous family background, then all the more important for you to be making those connections, whether it's where you live or if you have any threads that will help you find that. But I think, that's important for everybody, like no matter what our background is to pay those respects to our local Aboriginal traditions, or if we're in the Torres Strait Islands, or anywhere, wherever we are. Like even, when we go back to Britain or any country, we should be paying our respects to the Indigenous traditions of those places and doing things appropriately, I think. Maybe somebody else can take this next question. Oh, no, that's back to our question.
That was a question, but I was wondering, like, how do you think living and writing in Australia has influenced your magical practice?
Great question. Do you want to go first, Frances?
I'm asking you.
Oh, me? Okay. How has living?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't known anything else. I mean, I have. I was born in England and I lived there till I was 6. And we did travel back every now and then to visit family. And my mum's very Yorkshire and my dad's from Lancashire area, and he lived around the place. So we still have a very English connection. But growing up in Australia, I always managed to have that traveling back and forth and being able to see what I was like in England and then see what I was like here, and recognizing the differences and the specialness of Australia. And it gave me a love for my heritage in feeling that connection to England, but also a love for this land that's so full of magic. There's so many beautiful places here. Unfortunately, where I grew up, I didn't know anything about the Aboriginal traditions, so that was never part of what I did. And even when I was writing this book, I didn't know a great deal. I'd had a couple of friends and I'd done a little bit of volunteering, but I didn't know much at all. But I knew how important it was, and I knew that we needed to recognize the sacredness of a gum tree as well as an oak tree, or a kookaburra as well as I'm trying to think of something that's specifically English bird. But we've got quite a lot of the ones that they talk about here, like a wren that they have here, but we have them here too. We have amazing magic here, and I felt like it wasn't being acknowledged, even just in mainstream culture. Like the fact that you see snow, fake snow on the windows at Christmas time in the middle of the heat of summer, and people are importing pumpkins at Halloween at the beginning of summer. It just that kind of thing just drove me crazy, even as a kid, before I'd even found paganism. So and then you go into these beautiful magical gullies with palm trees and a waterfall and think this is full of magic. This is our land's magic. Or you're in the desert, in the the wide open spaces of red earth, and there's some silence there that's otherworldly. So I think that it speaks for itself, the magic of the land here. You can't avoid it, and you can't push a foreign system onto it. There's a necessity to question and to change and to adapt. I'm really interested to ask you both, actually, in working with aspecting and goddesses and things like that. How does that shift and change as a result of being in the Southern Hemisphere or being in Australia? And we also have another question. If somebody wants to take that.
So many questions. Which one do you want to tackle, Frances?
Well, considering I've written a book about the Sabbath, I might take the question from Jenny. How do you find this? Most books on the craft or paganism will tell you to move the Sabbath 6 months around. So that's fine. That's sort of a good sort of rule of thumb to take. But I did mention this earlier when I wrote my very first book, Dancing the Sacred Wheel. Just doing that in some of the microclimates, it always doesn't work. And I think it is how I've worked with, say, the British seasonal folklore, is use that sort of more on a psychological level, and then look to the stories to see how they fit in the landscape. I mean, it's Lunasad or Lanasa or Lamas is a good one because that's, apart from last year or the year before when we had the horrendous bushfire season. But the 1st of January or February is usually the bushfire season, or when our temperatures, especially here in South Australia, just skyrocket. So I don't see that as a gathering of the harvest. I almost see that as sort of like annihilation, but in a unique way, because it reflects the uniqueness of Australian plants, where they need that intense heat, usually of a bushfire, to cleanse what's no longer needed and then to encourage that new regrowth. So we're almost having to rewrite that whole mythos for that Sabbath ourselves. I sort of embody a Celtic, Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, because I always see her with her sort of rage and the annihilation that she almost caused of humankind coming through at that time. But it's sort of like the ending of the old in order for the new to start. So when it comes to working with the Sabbaths here in Australia, I think it's okay for us to take a lot of liberty and sort of write our own mythos or our own version or interpretation in there. There's a little bit of Aboriginal lore that I've found, but I personally, I'm not even Australian. Technically, I'm actually born across the ditch in New Zealand and have a piece of paper saying I'm an Australian. So I feel very uncomfortable adapting or utilising a lot of the Indigenous customs here, purely because I still feel I'm a stranger in a strange land. And I sort of leave it up to deity as to how they want to introduce themselves to me. I've had experiences with, say, the Australian version of the Green Man. I wouldn't call him, he doesn't come as the oak leaf man that we're probably very familiar with, but he's sort of a very shadowy, shimmery colour that reflects the eucalypt leaves. And a number of years ago, I was actually driving from Adelaide off to Mudgee, just north of Sydney, and going past the Hay Plains. It's a very long, straight stretch of road. And all of a sudden, what popped into my head was this iconic image of an Aboriginal hunter that we have on one of our coins, I think. Then I got a sort of like a spiny lizard. And then came from that was like a whirligig or sort of like the djinn. So to me, that was sort of like that part of the land that I was traveling through, that sort of deity was presenting itself to me in that it was a connection that was very ancient, and that's what I got from the Aboriginal image that popped into my head. But there was this sort of like the spiky, almost unpredictable, very hot energy, also very changeable as well, that came through in that sort of like whirling djinn character. And I don't know if that was any particular Aboriginal god or deity in that part of the world, but to me that was just really interesting. That's that present point in time, that's how that sort of energy, masculine energy, came through. So yeah, sometimes you just have to go outside our little, I don't know, constrictions or images that we have and just go with the flow, really. If that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's true for almost everywhere in the world that their seasons are not identical to Britain's, and that Australia, for example, is a massive place, and what's true for happening down in Tasmania on the spring equinox is going to be really different to what's happening in Brisbane, what's happening in Darwin, what's happening, you know, in the middle of the land or across the other side of the country. And for me, again, like it comes down to, this is where I am. What is happening here? What are the earth, air, water, fire telling me here? What is happening at this season? And creating sacred ceremony with those themes relevant to the piece of land that one is on at the time, which is what those kind of mythical figures in that ancient village in you know, Britain were doing at the time. That is where those festivals arose from. So in a way, like going back to basics and to begin to answer your question, Julie, I think for me also with the deities or the goddesses, going back to Isis is an interesting example for me. Like Isis's symbol, her name is a throne. And so Isis for me is in fact about rulership and a particular human relationship to land and community and the temple. And so that kind of thread of Isis carries like across wherever there are humans, or Artemis as the crescent moon. Well, we all see a crescent moon, that time in the sky. And so in a way, stepping a little bit away from the stories and back to the symbols, like Eve as the fruiting tree. We all have fruiting trees. And we think that, it's most likely or very unlikely to have been an apple actually in that biblical story, that we've just called it that. And so for me to say, well, maybe it was a native fig tree, maybe all of these fruiting trees carry this symbol of Eve with them. And so if I'm going to work with Eve as a goddess, I might go out and create relationship with that native fig in the corner of my garden and begin working from that basis.
Yeah, I think that back to basics idea is so important in so many of the things that we do here in Australia. I talk about it as working with the structure of our pagan traditions and then putting them into an Australian context. So like the same way that you're talking about deities, like going back and like looking what was the experience that they had when that concept or deity idea was formed, or whether the Sabbath was created. Like, what were they doing that made those things come? Like, what was the process? And learning from that process, we can make it more relevant to where we are, wherever we are. I see my book, like, it's called Australian Druidry, but I've had people from Texas write to me and say, oh, this book really helped me. And I think, wow, what? Why? And it's because it was a case study for them of how to connect anywhere. And when we look at, I think Australia all over, like all the different ways that we're doing it, help us understand that more broadly. Like, Australian authors have so many challenges in working with these British pagan traditions that becomes relevant in so many different places. I mean, even the diversity within Britain is something that I think people should get back to, like, assuming that, oh, it's in the book, that's how it goes. Like, the difference between like the Outer Hebrides, it's got to be different to Cornwall, there's diversity there as well. Sorry, I feel like I've
definitely
gone off on a rant.
Definitely, and I think I think that's what for me, being an author writing on these topics in Australia, I've felt really free to be quite radical, to be quite questioning, to rewrite it in my own way, because I did not fit into what was largely the written traditions in pagan and goddess books and works that had mainly pre-existed. So I really, for me, that was a big gift, that I didn't feel that I had to write to a tradition or stay within any particular guidelines in that way.
Even coming from a tradition, it's sort of given me a good excuse to push the boundaries and say, like, you might have, elders of my tradition may have just popped on a plane and came out to Australia and, and then sort of experienced the energies and thought nothing had happened. When I went back to England after spending probably about 9 months doing magic here, I couldn't do any sort of magic for the first 3 months because my head was telling me I should cast a circle one way and call my quarters one way, yet, feeling the energies, it was going the completely opposite way. And then I came back here and it was another 3 months before I could get myself sorted out. And then I know when I've gone to events, say, on the eastern seaboard, you guys call your elements in different directions as well. So everybody in Australia has different ways of calling quarters, of quarters, and even alignment with the elements. And I suppose, as Judy said, and I think you've also mentioned that too, Jane, we're in a unique position here that we have to have that experimentation And it's hoping from our writings, from being Southern Hemispheric authors, that gives our Northern Hemispheric readers sort of that encouragement to say, hey, put your books down, step away from your computer, what's your land saying to you? And I think that's the best and the big bit thing of our part.
Yes. So read all our books.
I love that we all write books. I love that we all write books that say, put the book down, go out. The book can only tell you so much. It's really all about your relationship with the land. Yeah.
Yes. Question everything. Work out why. Don't think that the book is the practice. Get out there and do it.
Because I think what we've all agreed on is that our books, don't get brownie points, Trevor, because I'm holding up both my books. We're writing it from our perspective. So anybody's books is just based on their own thoughts. So take our note and do it yourself, really.
Yeah. Definitely. That seems like a really great note to end on. Like, yes, we're all proud of and delight in our books and believe that we're saying profound, beautiful and interesting things. And it's about creating relationship with one's own magic, one's own place in the world, and following that learning and that guidance.
And through that connection to how were these traditions created and how can we do that now? We're connecting with our ancestors and the actual practices that they did in whatever context we're in. So.
Yes. Yeah, so start by asking questions.
Yes. And
we could be on a wrap. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm sure we all appreciate people reading our books and writing us about them.
We can write more books.